The two stories you're about to hear come out of Skinwalker country, the high desert of the American Southwest, where the people who live and work on that land keep a rule that's older than the roads. There are things out there you do not name because naming a thing is answering it, and answering it tells it exactly where you are. In the first story, an 81-year-old man wanders off his property into open desert, and 9 days later, long past the point where survival should have been possible, he walks out alive. The county calls it a miracle. His grandson is about to learn what it actually was. And in the second story, a veteran game warden in southern Utah gets sent to check on a dead bighorn ram and finds a set of tracks on that ridge that a lifetime of reading signs says cannot exist. He should have left it alone. It's his job not to. Both of these stories are told by the men who lived them, and fair warning, they are strange, they are deeply unsettling, and they do not end the way you think. If you're into scary stories, you're in the right place. We release new episodes every week, so subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss one. And if you like listening on the go or for sleep, check us out on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Leaving a rating or review helps us grow the show. So, grab a seat, get comfortable, and the next time something out in the dark calls you by name, make sure you know who's asking before you answer. My grandfather went missing on the 14th of September, and they found him alive on the 23rd. And for a while, that was the whole story. A miracle in the high desert. An 81-year-old man with a failing memory walks off his own property, survives 9 days without water in country that kills healthy young men in 3, and comes home to his family. The county paper ran it on the front page. People stopped my mother in the grocery store to tell her they'd been praying. I'm going to tell you what actually happened. Not because I expect to be believed, but because I've carried it alone for 2 years now, and I've learned that some weight doesn't get lighter with time. It just settles deeper into you. My name doesn't matter much, but you'll need something to hang the story on, so call me Dan. I'm 36 years old. I work line maintenance for the Rural Electric Cooperative in a county in northern New Mexico that I'm not going to name. What that job means, for the purposes of this story, is that I know the backcountry better than almost anyone alive. Power lines don't follow the roads out here. They cut across mesa tops and down through washes and over ground that no one else has a reason to visit. I've spent 15 years driving 2-track roads that don't appear on any map, walking easements through country where the only footprints are mine and the ones the cattle leave. When something goes wrong 40 miles from pavement at 2 Hamas in the morning, I'm the one they send. I know what the land looks like in every season and every kind of light. I know what belongs out there. I'm telling you all of that first so you'll understand that when I say I saw something that didn't belong, I'm not a tourist talking. I've seen bears, mountain lions, feral dogs, escaped buffalo, drug runners, and one time a naked man walking the center line of County Road 14 at dawn in January who turned out to be a veteran off his medication and half dead of cold. I've seen everything the desert has. I thought I had. My grandfather's name was Saul. Solomon on his birth certificate, but nobody called him that in my lifetime. He was a diesel mechanic for 40 years. First for the mines and then for himself out of a steel shop building on the 40 acres he bought in 1978. The property sits at the dead end of a county road up against public land that runs unbroken for 60 miles before it hits anything you could call a town. The house is small. The shop is bigger than the house, which tells you everything about the man. He raised my mother there. After my grandmother passed, he stayed on alone. And for a long time, that worked fine because Saul was the most capable man I ever knew. He could fix anything with an engine in it and most things without one. He taught me to shoot, to weld, to read weather, and to change the oil in a truck before I could see over the fender I was leaning across. The decline started small, the way I'm told it always does, maybe 4 years ago. He'd tell me a story about a Cummins engine he'd rebuilt. And then 20 minutes later, he'd tell me the same story with the same pauses in the same places. And his eyes would be bright with it, because for him it was the first telling. Then he started losing tools, which had never once happened in his life. His shop was organized down to the last washer. Then he lost the truck keys, then the truck itself in the parking lot of the feed store he'd been going to for 50 years. Then one evening in the spring before it happened, my mother called him, and he answered and asked, polite and a little confused, who she was. The doctors gave it a name and gave us pamphlets. My mother wanted him moved to town. Saul refused in a way that ended the discussion, and I backed him, which caused a fight between my mother and me that I'd give a lot to take back now. My position was that the property was the only ground he still knew by heart. In town, he'd be lost the minute he walked out a door. Out there, even on his worst days, his feet knew the ground. The house, the shop, the fence lines, the wash. Nearly 50 years of walking the same dirt. I believe the land itself would hold him together longer than any facility would. So, we compromised. My mother drove out every morning. I stopped by after work 3 or 4 evenings a week and stayed over most weekends. We put a whiteboard in the kitchen with the day and the date and our phone numbers. We hid the truck keys. His dog, a blue heeler named June, went everywhere he went, and June had more sense than most people I've worked with. For about a year, the system held. I want to describe him to you the way he was because everything that comes later depends on it. Saul was a lean, hard old man with hands that stayed strong after the rest of him started to go. He favored his left hand for everything, which had made him a curiosity his whole life, a left-handed mechanic in a right-handed trade. He ate in a particular order. Protein first always, a habit from mine cafeterias where you ate what mattered before the whistle. He sat in one chair in that house, a green recliner by the window. And he sat in it a particular way, dropping the last few inches because his knees were shot, then working his shoulders twice against the backrest, left, then right. He hummed when he worked. Not songs, just a low sound. Steady. The sound of a man at ease in his work. When he laughed, it started silent, his shoulders going before any sound came out. I knew that man completely. Every habit, every preference, every small fixed thing about him. Remember that. The of September was a Saturday. My mother got to the property at 8 in the morning, and the door was open and the coffee pot was on and warm. And Saul was gone. June was gone too, which at first was a comfort. He walks, we told ourselves. He walks the fence line. He walks the wash. The dog is with him. My mother searched the 40 acres herself first, calling. And then she called me. And I left a job site with a transformer hanging off a boom truck and drove 90 minutes with my hand flat on the horn through both towns. By noon, we had deputies. By evening, we had the county search and rescue team. And by the next morning, we had state police, a helicopter, dog teams, and 40 volunteers, some of whom were men Saul had kept running for decades. Ranchers whose balers and pumps and graders he'd brought back from the dead. Those men searched hard. I want that on the record. Nobody quit early. Nobody cut corners. I flew in the helicopter twice and walked grid the rest of the time. And here's the thing about walking grid for your own blood. You want to find him and you're terrified you will. Every juniper is the shape of a fallen man until you get close. Every shadow under a rock ledge stops your heart. You learn what your own fear tastes like hour after hour and you keep walking. On the 3rd day, June came home, alone. She came down the wash at dusk, moving low. And she wouldn't come to anyone at first, not even me. And when I finally got hands on her, She was shaking in a way that dogs don't shake from being tired. No blood on her, no injury. The search leaders read it as a good sign. A dog can't carry water. She left him to survive. And maybe she'd lead us back. She would not lead anyone anywhere. They took her up the wash on a lead the next morning and she fought the whole way. And at a certain bend in the wash, maybe 4 miles up, she sat down and would not move. And when the handler pulled, she screamed. I'd never heard a dog make that sound. They marked the spot and searched out from it in circles for 2 days, and found nothing at all. I'll come back to that bend in the wash. Everything comes back to that bend in the wash. By day 6, the language around us changed. Nobody said recovery out loud, but the search moved slower, the circles got tighter, and the dog team switched to a different kind of dog. My mother stopped eating. She sat at Saul's kitchen table with the whiteboard behind her that still said, Monday, September 14th, in her own handwriting, and she planned his funeral in a spiral notebook because planning was the only thing that kept her hands from shaking. I kept walking grid. I walked grid after the official searches stood down for the day, alone with a headlamp, which you're not supposed to do. And I'd get back to my truck at midnight and sleep 3 hours in the bed of it and walk again at dawn. The search area by the end was a map on a folding table in the fire station, shaded in probability bands. The math on those bands is built from decades of cases. A man Saul's age, his condition, no water. The innermost band, where they'd expect to find him, was already searched twice over. The outermost band, the hard edge of the possible, sat at about 6 miles from the house. Beyond that line, the map was blank, because beyond that line, the experts said, there was no version of events where an 81-year-old man was still moving. On the morning of the 23rd of September, day 9, an elk hunter scouting a drainage 11 miles northeast of the property found my grandfather walking up the center of a dry wash. 11 miles. 5 miles past the edge of the possible, walking. The hunter said later that he almost didn't call it in as a rescue because the man didn't move, the way lost people move. Lost people wander. They walk in arcs. They follow water that isn't there. They shed clothing. They sit down a lot. This man was walking a straight line up the wash at a steady pace with his hands loose at his sides. And when the hunter shouted, the man stopped, stood still for a moment, and then turned around all at once. Not a startled turn. The hunter had trouble describing it. He said the whole body came around at once, smooth, in one motion, and nothing about it was startled. Then my grandfather smiled at him and asked how far it was back to the road. They brought him out on a side-by-side to the highway, and an ambulance took him to the regional hospital. And my mother and I drove there doing over 100 with a deputy escort. I remember the hallway outside the emergency department, my mother's fingernails in my forearm, the doctor coming through the doors with a face that we couldn't read until he said the words, dehydrated, sunburned, feet in bad shape, some weight loss, otherwise, and he said this word twice, remarkable, otherwise remarkable. We got let in 2 at a time. My mother went first, alone, and I stood in the hall and listened to her crying through the door. The kind of crying that comes out of a person all at once when they've been holding it for 9 days. Then it was my turn. He was propped up in the bed with an IV in the back of his hand, and he was burned dark across the face and neck, and his lips were split. And he looked at me and said my name. And I want to be honest with you about that moment. I cried. I held that old man's hand and I put my forehead down on it and I cried. And I thanked God, in whom I have never fully believed. And for about 90 seconds, everything in the world was fixed. It was while I was straightening up and wiping my face that I caught it. The first wrong thing. The room had a wide interior window facing the hallway, and the hallway was full of family by then. My mother, 2 of her cousins, a neighbor, all of them hugging each other and laughing and crying on the other side of the glass. and Saul was watching them. Which would have been fine. A man taking in the people who love him. Except he wasn't watching them. The angle of his eyes was short of the hallway. He was watching the glass. He was watching their reflections layered over his own reflection. The faces sliding across the surface of the window, and his eyes were going from one reflected face to the next in a slow circuit. And his lips were moving, very slightly, with no sound. I told myself he was praying. He was never a praying man, but 9 days in the desert can change that. And I told myself he was praying, and I put it away. You're going to hear me say that a lot in this story. I told myself something, and I put it away. I've had 2 years to think about all the things I put away, and what I've concluded is this. The mind protects the shape of the world it knows. When something arrives that doesn't fit that shape, the mind doesn't sound an alarm. It files. It explains. It works the wrong thing down until it fits under a familiar name, stress, or grief, or dementia. And then it moves on and you go on. The mind will do this over and over for months, for as long as it can. Because the alternative is to stand in your grandfather's kitchen and admit that the thing drinking coffee in his chair is not him. They kept him 4 days for observation. The doctors called his survival extraordinary, and his recovery more so. One of the younger ones kept coming back to the feet. 9 days of walking should have destroyed an old man's feet, and his were blistered and raw. But the doctor said, in a hallway conversation I overheard and wasn't meant to, that the wear pattern was strange, that it didn't read as 9 days of damage. It read as one very hard day of it. We brought him home on the 27th of September. Neighbors had mowed the property and stocked the kitchen, and there was a banner, and my mother had washed and pressed his clothes, and June was waiting in the yard because a neighbor had been feeding her at the shop. I will describe to you exactly what the dog did, because the dog knew on the first day what took me 2 months to accept. June was standing in the yard when my truck came up the drive with Saul in the passenger seat. She was standing already, head up, and I watched her in the windshield the whole way in. When the truck stopped and his door opened, she didn't bark, and she didn't run to him, and she didn't run away. She lowered her head about 2 in, and she went still. Perfectly still, head lowered, weight back, every muscle set. And then she turned, not fast, and trotted to the shop, and lay down in the dark of the open bay facing out. And from that day forward, in the months that man lived in that house, June never came inside it again. In all the months that followed, she made a sound at him exactly once, and I'll come to that night. She just kept him in front of her. Always, from a distance, and she never once turned her back to him. My mother said the desert had traumatized her. There was an explanation for the dog, too. The first weeks after he came home, the wrongness was small, and every piece of it had an explanation waiting. He ate wrong. I told you Saul ate protein first, 60 years of habit, a fork moving in an order as fixed as sunrise. The first dinner home, my mother made him a pork chop and beans and cornbread, and he ate the cornbread first, all of it, and then the beans, and then he sat looking at the pork chop for a moment before he ate it. And he cut it with the knife in his left hand and the fork in his right. Saul was left-handed. The fork went in the left. It had gone in the left for 81 years. The explanation for that one was easy. The disease scrambles things. The pamphlet said so. Motor habits, sequencing. My mother actually smiled about the cornbread. He's got his appetite, she said. Let him eat cake first if he wants. He's earned it. He sat wrong. The green recliner by the window, the drop of the last few inches, the shoulder work, left then right. The man who came home lowered himself into that chair evenly, controlled the whole way down, on knees that were supposed to be shot, and then sat with his back not touching the backrest. He'd sit there for 3 hours holding a coffee he never drank, spine straight off the cushion. And the first time I really looked at that, the length of an evening, my neck hurt on his behalf. No 81-year-old sits 3 hours without touching a backrest. I told myself he was stiff from the hospital bed. Explained. He stopped humming. The house had always had that low idle in it, and now it didn't. And a missing sound is harder to notice than a new one, so that took me weeks. When his laugh came, it came sound first now, a laugh that started in his mouth instead of his shoulders. It was a good laugh. It was warm. It was placed right. It landed at the right moments in conversation. It was better placed, honestly, than his real one, which used to show up late or in the wrong spots, because Saul laughed at the inside of his own head half the time. This new laugh was for the room. It watched the room while it happened. And he slept wrong, which is to say, I don't believe he slept at all. I was staying over most weekends, the way I had before, in the back bedroom that used to be my mother's. The walls in that house are old plaster, and the floors are wood, and sound carries. The first Saturday night I woke at 2 o'clock in the morning to footsteps, slow, even, room to room, kitchen, front room, hallway, back, and around again. Not the shuffle of an old man looking for the bathroom, a patrol. I lay there and listened to it for an hour, the same circuit at the same pace, and at some point I understood that the steps had a rhythm that never varied, never paused at a window, never bumped anything in the dark. And I fell asleep telling myself the word sundowning, which was in the pamphlets, and the pamphlets could cover almost anything. The second Saturday night I got up. It was 3:20. I didn't turn on a light. I came up the hallway in my socks, and the footsteps had stopped, and the bathroom door was standing open with the small light over the mirror on, and my grandfather was standing at the sink with his back to me, facing the mirror. He wasn't doing anything at the sink. The water was off. His hands were down at his sides. He was standing closer to the mirror than a person stands, a foot from it maybe, and he was looking at his own face, and his face was moving. It went through grief first. I watched the reflection fold into grief, the mouth, the brows, the whole architecture of it, and hold there, still, complete, for about 3 seconds. Then it let go all at once and went smooth. Not to a neutral expression. Smooth. A face at rest has a resting shape. Yours does. Mine does. 60 little tensions that make you who you are. This went past rest into nothing. No expression at all, and no person in it. Then it built again, and it was warmth. The crinkled eyes, the soft mouth. My grandfather's Sunday morning face held 3 seconds, and off. Then amusement, held, off. Then grief again, and the second grief was better than the first. I couldn't have told you how, standing there in the dark hallway with my heart going, but the second grief was closer to something tuned, corrected, checked against a standard. It ran the circuit maybe 5 times while I stood there. Grief, warmth, amusement, and one more I didn't have a name for then, though I have one now. It was the face you make at a person you love who is telling you a long story you've heard before. Patience, worn as love. He was practicing that one hardest. The floor moved under my weight. Old house. The face in the mirror stopped mid-change between expressions, in a place where a face isn't supposed to stop, and the eyes came up in the glass and found me in the dark of the hallway with no searching at all, straight to me, and we looked at each other in the mirror for a length of time I can't honestly put a number on. Then the face put on warmth. I watched it go on, and my grandfather turned around, the whole body at once, in one motion, and said, in a voice with sleep in it that hadn't been in his posture, that he couldn't sleep, and getting old was a sorry business, and I should go on back to bed. And I did. That's the part I have to live with. I said goodnight to it, and it said goodnight to me in his voice, with his warm face on, and I walked back down that hallway with the skin on my back crawling, and I lay in the dark in my mother's childhood bedroom and did the most explaining to myself I have ever done. The disease, confusion. Old men get strange in the night. By morning, over eggs and daylight with the coffee going, I had it put away where I could almost not feel it. Almost. Because here's the truth about explanations. They hold, but they don't erase anything. Everything you put away stays with you, adding up. And some nights, lying awake, you can feel all of it at once. October went on. He got better. You have to understand what better meant to my mother. For a year before the disappearance, she had watched her father dissolve by inches. Names gone, then faces, then the thread of a sentence. Every week, a little less of him. That's a grief that doesn't get a funeral. And she'd been carrying it alone at that kitchen table every morning for a year. And now her father was coming back to her. He remembered names again. Hers, mine, the cousins, the neighbors. He asked about people's kids, the right kids, matched to the right people. He knew the day and the date without the whiteboard every time, instantly. Which, if you know the disease, is its own kind of wrong, because the real Saul on his good days used to work it out. You'd watch him reach for it, count his way in from an anchor. Church was Sunday, so this is Tuesday. The thing at the table didn't reach. You asked the date, and the date came back flat and immediate, with no reaching in it at all. She saw a miracle. The doctors, on the follow-up visits, saw a remission they couldn't explain and wrote careful notes about. The neighbors saw a tough old bird the desert couldn't kill. 60 people looked at that man getting sharper by the week, and every one of them saw good news. I saw the mistakes getting fewer. That's all recovery was, from where I stood in the doorway of that kitchen. In September, the thing ate its food in the wrong order. By late October, protein first, every meal. In September, the knife went in the left hand. By November, I watched it carve at Sunday dinner left-handed, smooth, and look up at me while it did it. The chair, the laugh, migrating out of the mouth and up into the shoulders where it belonged. Arriving a little late now, a little inward, the way his did. One by one, the errors I'd explained away were being found and corrected. And there is only one kind of thing that corrects errors. A thing that knows it's making them. A thing that is checking its work. A student. I worked out the rule of it that fall, or as much of a rule as I'll ever have. It had what was in his head, his memories, or something close to them. Names, dates, the county fair and the brake fluid, who married whom and whose bailer he'd fixed. What it did not have, and had to earn, was everything a body learns without the head's permission. The hand a fork falls into, the order hunger takes. The place a laugh starts. Memory was not muscle. That was why it could tell his stories perfectly on the first night home, and still, in October, be teaching itself which hand he favored. The night I stopped being able to pretend was the second Friday of November. My mother had gone home after supper. I was staying over. We were in the front room. The thing in the green recliner with its coffee it wouldn't drink. Me on the couch with the co-op's outage reports on my laptop. The radio low between us. And it was, I'll say this plainly, a nice evening. That's the trap of it. The thing nobody tells you. Horror in a house doesn't feel the way it does in the stories. Mostly it feels normal. Mostly it's the radio and the furnace and somebody in the kitchen. And the wrongness is one small piece of an evening that's otherwise your whole ordinary life, and you'd feel crazy pointing at it. 3 days earlier on the Tuesday, I'd been in the kitchen with my mother while she washed dishes, and she'd been low. The miracle glow was fading into worry about logistics, his license, the winter, whether this remission would hold. And I'd stood beside her drying plates and said something to her. Quiet. Just for us. I'd said that whatever came, we wouldn't be doing it alone. The three of us. And that she'd carried the whole year herself, and it was my turn to carry some. And I was there for the duration. It wasn't a speech. It was a thing a son says to his mother at a sink, half a dozen sentences. And I'd put my hand on her shoulder at the end of it, and she'd nodded and not trusted her voice. And that was that. Saul had been in the front room the whole time, 30 ft and a wall away, with the television going. Friday night in the front room, the thing in the recliner turned its head and looked at me, and gave back my Tuesday. Word for word, not the gist of it, not a garbled echo. The whole thing, whatever came, not alone, the three of us, your turn to carry, the duration, in order, with my pauses. I have a habit, when I'm saying something that matters, of stopping in the middle of it, one beat before the part I mean most. My mother teases me about it. It kept my pause. It reproduced my pause in the middle, one beat before the part I meant most. And it watched my face the way I now understood it had been watching my face for 2 months, the way I watch a meter while I make an adjustment. And when it finished, it let a silence sit. And then it said, "Did that sound right?" I didn't answer. My chest wasn't working correctly. And it smiled my grandfather's smile, shoulders first, warm, perfectly placed, and said, "Never mind an old man." He was just turning over something I'd said to my mother. It had stayed with him. It was a fine thing for a son to say. And it turned back to the radio and drank, for the first time I had ever witnessed, a long swallow of its coffee. And I understood with a clarity that has never once left me in the 2 years since that I had just watched a rehearsal, and that the question had not been rhetorical, and that I was not the audience for the performance it was building. I was the material. I want to stop here and address the thing you may be thinking, because I thought it too, and I wore it out. Dementia does strange things. It resurfaces buried recordings. It garbles time. Maybe an old man overheard his grandson through a wall, and the words lodged and came back out. I built that explanation with my own hands, and I lived inside it, and for about a week it held. What broke it was small, the way everything in this story is small, until suddenly it is not. The Sunday after that, my mother, at dinner, mentioned the moment at the sink, glancing at me, warm. And the thing at the head of the table said, mild, unbothered, that it hadn't heard any of that. It must have been asleep in front of the television, but it was glad its family talked that way when it wasn't listening. It lied, easily, correctly, socially, a lie any of us would tell. But it had already shown me it heard every word through that wall, and so the lie could only mean one thing. It knew what it had done in the front room on Friday. It knew what it had shown me. The showing had been on purpose, and the lie was the second half of the same message, and the message was, no one will ever believe you. It was right about that, and it found that out, and I found it out over the following 3 weeks, which were the loneliest of my life. I didn't lead with monsters. Give me that much credit. I went to my mother with the small true things, the handedness, the chair, the sleeplessness, the mirror, and I said the word imposter exactly once, framed soft, framed as maybe, and I watched my mother's face close against me, slow and complete. You have to see it from inside her year. She'd lost her father by inches, prayed him back from the desert, gotten a miracle certified by doctors and printed in the paper. And now her son, her only child, was standing in her kitchen with a shake in his voice, trying to take the miracle away. There's a clinical word for what she decided I had, and she never said it. But I heard her say the softer words around it to her cousin on the phone. Stress. The search. He walked those grids alone at night. He hasn't been sleeping. He's fixated. Every observation I brought her after that got counted as one more symptom of mine. The more precise I got, the sicker I sounded. That's the trap with a thing that's almost perfect. The evidence against it is a list of nothings. A fork, a chair, a pause. You recite your list of nothings to a person who loves the man you're accusing, and you watch yourself become the problem. The performance being built in that house needed an audience that believed, and it had one. And it needed the one witness who didn't believe to be discredited, and I discredited myself just by telling the truth. It never had to lift a finger against me. I keep coming back to how clean that was. My birthday is the 2nd of December. My mother threw a small dinner at Saul's place, her cousins, the neighbor couple, a cake. The thing sat at the head of the table in a flannel shirt my grandmother bought at least 25 years ago, and it held the room the whole evening, and it was magnificent. It told the story about the county fair and the brake fluid, which is a real story, which happened, which I've heard 50 times. And it told it better than Saul ever told it. Saul used to lose the thread and double back. The thing had edited him. It kept the doubling back, one instance of it, in the right place, because the stumble was part of the telling, but only one, trimmed, tightened, and it landed the ending into a room roaring with laughter while it watched every laughing face with eyes that never once laughed. And then it raised its glass and it toasted me. To my grandson, it said, who watches over this family, it said, and it turned its head and looked at me down the length of the table through the candle smoke and let one beat of silence sit before the part it meant most. Whether we know it or not, it said. Everyone drank. My mother squeezed my wrist and her eyes were wet, and she whispered that she was so glad we had him back. I drank too. And over the rim of the glass, I looked at the thing wearing my grandfather, and it looked at me, patient, worn as love, wearing the face it had practiced hardest in the bathroom mirror. And I made the only decision that was left to make. If no one was going to believe me, I'd stop talking. Let it think the walls had worked. And on my own time, with my own tools, I was going to do the one thing nobody in all those 9 days had ever actually done. I was going to find my grandfather. Before I could start, it escalated, and I need to tell you about the night in my bedroom because it changed the shape of my understanding. Up to that point, I'd believed I was watching a thing learn to be Saul. That night, I learned the curriculum had moved on. Mid-December. I was still staying weekends, and you might fairly ask why. 2 reasons. Whatever it was, my mother was alone in that house with it 3 or 4 evenings a week, and my being there felt, maybe stupidly, protective. And I'd learned that the surest way to confirm my mother's story about me was to change my behavior. Stay normal. Watch everything. Say nothing. I woke at 3:10, and I want to be exact about what woke me, because it wasn't sound. It was breath. My own breathing had company. Something in the room was breathing when I breathed. In when I went in. Out when I went out. In a lock so close to perfect that it disappeared into itself. And the falling out of that lock, some tiny slip of it, is what reached down into my sleep and pulled. It was standing beside the bed. Full dark, but a window behind it. Winter starlight. Enough to make a shape. My grandfather's shape. Except in the posture I sleep in. I sleep on my left side, left arm bent under the pillow, right shoulder rolled forward, head tipped down. It was doing that, upright. Left arm bent up against its chest holding a pillow that wasn't there. Right shoulder rolled, head tipped, eyes open, watching me, and its ribs moving with mine. And I lay locked inside my own terror, matched breath for breath, doing the fastest, hardest thinking of my life. And the thinking went, if I move, it knows I'm awake, and I cannot let it decide what happens next. And so, I did the one thing left inside the rules we'd both been keeping. I reached over, slow, a man half asleep, and turned on the lamp. It didn't flinch. That's the detail that matters most. Light filled the room, and the thing beside my bed adjusted nothing. Finished the breath we were on, unhurried, standing there in my sleeping posture inside a perfect copy of my grandfather. And then its head came upright, and it looked at the lamp with something in its face I can only call approval. And it said, in Saul's voice, gentle, unhurried, "That's better." It's hard to learn a face in the dark. Then it straightened its arm and let the pillow that wasn't there fall away, and it walked out of my room and down the hall, and I heard the green recliner take its weight evenly, the last few inches controlled, and I sat on the edge of the bed with the lamp on until the window went gray. It had stopped hiding from me entirely, and it was studying me in my sleep, and there was no explanation left for any of it. But lying doesn't come easy to me, so let me set down honestly the other thing I felt that night at the edge of the bed, under the fear, and colder than the fear, I felt chosen. I didn't have the shape of it yet. Why me for what? But you know, when you're being measured, that thing had my dimensions, and it was coming back nightly to check them. 2 days later, I started the search. I did it the way I do everything, because the way I do everything is the only advantage I ever had over that thing. It had lived a long time. I'd come to believe that much, and it knew people down to the threads, but I know ground. 15 years of line work in that county. I've walked easements through every kind of country in every season. I can look at a drainage and tell you where a man would walk and where he'd never, where the shade lives in September, where the ground holds a track, and where it eats one. I pulled everything from the search. I'd been inside it, so getting the maps was easy. The grids, the assignments, the daily logs, the probability bands. I laid it all out on my kitchen table in town, and I spent 3 evenings just reading it, and the hole in it stood up out of the paper almost immediately. Everyone had searched where a lost man could be. Nobody had searched where he was found. Follow me here. The hunter found him 11 mi out, 5 mi past the outer bend, and the moment that happened, every question turned around. The search stood down. The maps got folded. The story became the miracle. In all the celebration, no one ever went back out and asked the ground the only question that mattered. What is between the bend in the wash where a dog sat down screaming, 4 mi out, and the drainage where a smiling man walked out, 11 mi out? 7 mi of country, and I pulled the logs, and I can tell you exactly how much of those 7 mi the official search covered. None of it. It sat outside the possible. You don't spend resources outside the possible. Then I did the piece that told me where to walk, and this is line work. Pure and simple. When we hunt a fault, we don't wander the whole line. We know the current. We know the load, and we walk from the last known good point toward the first known bad one, and the fault lives on that path. Last known good point, the bend where June sat down. First known bad point, the drainage where the thing walked out. I drew the line between them on the topo map, and then I threw the straight line away because nothing walks straight in that country. And I built the real path the way water and animals and men build it, saddle to saddle, shade to shade, around the head of the bad canyon, and my pencil crossed a piece of country I actually knew. The co-op has a line through there, an old lateral serving 2 wells and a microwave repeater site, and I patrolled it maybe a dozen times over the years. Rough 2-track most of the way, rock outcrops along a north-facing rim, an old burn, and a band of shallow caves in the rimrock that I'd noticed for years. The way you notice things you have no reason to look at twice. Caves on the shaded side at the head of a wash, 4½ on my pencil line, from where a dog sat down and screamed, rather than go on. I went on a Saturday. I told my mother I'd picked up a weekend fault call, and I told the thing nothing. And if you're wondering whether it needed telling, hold that thought because I've wondered ever since. I took the work truck because the work truck belongs out there and my own doesn't, and I took water, rope, a headlamp, my 30-30 from behind the seat, and June. That last part wasn't sentiment. A dog that sat down at 4 miles knew something at 4 miles, and I wanted to know what she knew, and where she stopped knowing it. She loaded up into the cab without being asked, which she'd never once done in her life, and she sat upright in the passenger seat facing forward the whole drive. And I'm not a fanciful man, but I'll say it plain. That dog had been waiting 3 months for somebody to finally go. I parked at the repeater turnoff and walked in from the east, so I'd hit the rimrock with the sun behind me. Cold, still, high, thin sky. June worked ahead of me off the lead, quartering business first, and for the first 3 miles she was a normal dog on a normal morning. At the head of the wash, below the rimrock band, she stopped quartering. She came back to my knee and pressed against it and stayed there, and her hackles stood in a ridge from her collar to her tail, and she made no sound at all. We walked the last half-mile together with her shoulder on my leg the whole way, and I had the 30-30 out of the scabbard by then, and the country was silent in a manner I have no business trying to describe to you, except to say that I've worked that county for 15 years. And I have never before or since stood in a piece of it where nothing moved and nothing called, and even the wind seemed to root around. The caves sit in the base of the rim, a dozen openings, most of them shallow scoops you could see the back of from outside. One of them was deeper. The opening was narrow, chest high, facing north into permanent shade, and the ground in front of it was swept. I don't mean clean, I mean swept. Brushed in arcs, the way a man drags a branch to kill his own tracks, and done so many times over so long that the sweeping had worn a shallow dish into the dirt. June lay down 40 ft out, dropped flat, put her chin in the dirt and watched that opening. She was done. That was her line, and standing there next to a dog I trusted more than most men, I came close to making it my line too. I want to be honest about the fear. It wasn't sharp. Sharp fear I could have pushed through on anger alone. This was a low, wide fear, a flat cold that came off that swept ground and stayed in me the rest of that day, and every animal part of me wanted the truck. I ducked in with a headlamp. The cold inside was the stored cold of a place the sun has never touched. The passage ran back and down, chest high, 10 wide, then opened into a chamber where I could stand. My grandfather was there. I knew before the light finished swinging. Some part of me had known since September and had done its grieving in secret, in pieces, at 3 in the morning. And so what happened in that chamber wasn't shock, it was arrival. He lay along the back wall, on his side, knees drawn up, and the cold and the dry had kept him. And I'm not going to describe my grandfather's body to you beyond the 2 things you need. He'd been dead since the first days. That was plain from the state of him, and the medical examiner would later say the same with details I won't repeat. Whatever walked up that drainage on day 9 smiling at an elk hunter, my grandfather had already been dead at least a week by then. And the entire miracle, the prayers, the front page, my mother's tears in the hospital hallway, all of it had been performed over a dead man lying in this hole with his knees drawn up. I never learned whether the thing grew the body it wore or shaped some part of itself into him, and I've stopped needing to know. I know this much, and it's enough. The body in that cave was Solomon. The body living in his house was not. And the second thing, his face was unmarked, untouched, at peace. My grandfather entire. I'm told, by people who study things I wish I didn't know about, that this detail should not have been possible given what came after. And I've stopped trying to make it fit any natural frame. I'll say only what I believe now, standing on the far side of all of it. The thing didn't take his face by force. It learned his face the way it learned my pauses, from outside, patient, in the dark, over 6 days. And what it did take from him, it took, without marking him. And there is a mercy in that so cold and so foreign that I can't hold it in my head for long. The light kept moving because my hand was shaking, and that's how I found the rest. The chamber went back further than the beam's first reach, a low shelf along one side, and the shelf was not empty. Folded clothes, folded, squared, stacked, a woman's dress in a flower print that hasn't been sold anywhere in my lifetime. A pair of boots, cracked to lace holes, older than the dress. A denim jacket, child-sized. 7, 8 stacks, spaced even along the shelf. Kept. And I stood in front of that shelf and understood that I was not standing in a den. These were keepsakes. Kept things. Saved things. At the end of the shelf, set apart, square to the edge, sat a man's leather wallet. And I picked it up with 2 fingers, and it opened stiff. A driver's license, this state, expired for decades. The photograph was a man in his 60s, heavy-browed, half smiling at a camera in some county office on a morning when the world was ordinary. Issued 1969, expired 1971. A name I'm not going to give you because he has family still living 3 counties over, and they've since been given more truth than the state could bring itself to write down. And they don't need his name in my mouth on top of it. I stood in that cold with a dead stranger's wallet in my hand, doing the coldest thinking of my life. And the thinking arrived at 3 flat facts. It had been doing this since before I was born. The stacks on that shelf were lives kept, ordered, saved. And somewhere out in 3 or 4 counties worth of old newspapers were the miracles that matched them. The wanderers who came home changed. The strange remissions. The folks who got so much better before they passed. It chose the already half-gone every time. Usually the old and the failing, not always. The child-sized jacket told me that sickness could serve the same purpose as age. It took people whose families had already begun grieving them. People whose coming back wrong had a story waiting to cover it. Nobody interrogates a miracle. It had learned the one thing about us that mattered most. That grieving people will believe almost anything that offers them hope back. And it had been living inside that fact comfortably for 50 years and more. And the third fact, the one that followed me out of that cave and has never left. The swept ground, the kept shelf, the order of the place. This was not an animal's mess, and no animal sweeps its doorstep for 50 years. Nothing about the chamber was hidden from a person who came this far, and no person could come this far by accident. 4 1/4 2 miles past a screaming dog, over the edge of the possible, along a line only 2 kinds of mind would ever draw. Its kind and mine. It had watched me for 3 months. It had my dimensions. It knew what I did for a living and how I thought, and that I hunted faults for wages, from last known good to first known bad. And if it had wanted this room to stay secret from me, the wallet would not have been sitting square to the edge of that shelf, faced out at the exact end of the search. The cave wasn't a lair I'd cracked, it was a test I was passing. And one more thing settled on me in that chamber, colder than the rest, and it answered the question the search maps had never been able to. My grandfather did not cross the last 4 1/2 miles under his own power. He couldn't have. The experts were right about that, and they'd been right all along. The bend was where June sat down. The bend was where something met him. Something he trusted enough to go with, and whatever happened past that point, that dog, who feared nothing in her whole working life, had been too frightened to follow. June was on her feet when I came out into the light, and she looked at my face, and then away. And neither of us was ashamed of the other for wanting gone from there. I marked the position. I touched nothing else. I left my grandfather where he lay with a promise spoken out loud in that chamber that I mean to carry to my own grave and have so far kept every word of. And I drove out of that country at a speed that was hard on the truck, and the whole way down the wash road onto the pavement through the first town, one sentence turned over and over in my head with a weight that grew by the mile. It wanted me to find this. It's ready for whatever comes next. It was full dark when I got to the property. I hadn't planned to go there. I'd planned to go home and think and come at everything cold in the morning. And I was past the county road turnoff before I admitted where my hands were taking the wheel, because my mother's car was gone from her place in town and it was Saturday. And on Saturdays, she made supper for her father. Her car wasn't at the property either. Later I'd learn it had sent her home early, gently, said it was tired and that she'd stopped at her cousin's place on the way back to town, which is why I never passed her on the road. It had cleared the evening. It knew where I'd been, and it had cleared the evening, and it was sitting on the dark porch waiting for me in Saul's canvas coat, in Saul's shape, with the porch light off. I stopped the truck 30ft out with the headlights on it. June stood up on the seat and made the only sound she ever made at it. One sound low. And then, she was quiet, and she didn't take her eyes off it, and neither did I. It sat there in my high beams without one flicker of an old man in it. Nothing squinted, nothing shifted. It watched me through the windshield with its hands resting easy on its knees. And then it rose in one motion that had nothing to do with knees, and came down the steps into the light and stopped at my front bumper and looked at me across the hood of the truck. And it breathed in through its nose. Long, slow, unhurried, tasting. Cold in there, it said. Isn't it? Its voice had changed. Underneath Saul's voice, carrying it, ran a second sound, and the second sound was mine. My cadence, my pitch, shading the old man's wreckage of a voice. The two of them layered into one throat. And I understood what I was hearing. It was partway through learning me, and it was checking its progress out loud. I didn't answer. It didn't need me to. It looked at me a moment longer, patient, worn as it had taught its face to wear things, and then it said, the sentence that ended the middle of my life and started the last part. He kept well, it said. You'll bury him proper when we're finished. Then it turned and went up the steps and inside, and the kitchen light came on, warm and yellow, and through the window I watched it fill the kettle at the sink and set out 2 cups. It knew I'd come in. And God help me I did. I'm not going to pretend I remember every word of that hour at the kitchen table, because fear does real damage to memory. But the shape of it I have exact, because the shape of it is the reason everything after happened the way it did. It sat across from me in the yellow light with a cup of coffee it drank now, freely, and it talked. And for the first time since September, nothing in the house was performing. What sat across from me was operating the copy it had made of Saul, competently, without love, temporarily. It didn't threaten me. That's the thing I'd braced for. And the thing that never came. And its absence was worse. Threats mean a negotiation is on. What I got instead was a briefing. It told me in that layered voice, in sentences that kept perfect grammar and no soul, the state of things. The body was failing. It said that without drama, a mechanic reporting on an engine and strange truth is, I already knew. I'd seen the signs for 2 weeks and explained them away out of habit. A tremor in the left hand that had worked so hard to make the lead hand. A gray settling under the skin. A smell in the house underneath the coffee. Faint, dry, and old that I recognized now because I'd stood in its source that afternoon. Whatever it does to make a body and keep it moving, this one was nearly used up. It gave itself until spring, and it said so in a workman's flat, scheduling voice. And then it looked at me, with my grandfather's brown eyes gone absolutely still. And it complimented my line of work. A man who hunts faults, it said. Last good point to first bad one. It said it had watched men for longer than I'd been alive, and most of them look without a method, and a method was a rare thing and worth keeping. Worth keeping. Sitting at that table, I finally received whole the understanding that had been arriving in pieces since the night it stood by my bed breathing my breath. It wasn't studying me to hide from me. I was the next body. Not that night. In spring, when this body quit, there was learning left to do, and it liked its work done right. And there was one piece of business standing between it and a clean change, which was that a man in my position would be missed, questioned after, mourned. And a mourning is a searching, and it had survived 50 years and more by only ever taking the already half gone. I was a break from doctrine. Young, healthy, employed, loved. It had decided I was worth the risk anyway, and I'll tell you the reason it gave because I still hear the reason at 3 in the morning in its double voice, mine underneath. 60 more years, it said, nodding slow at the whole of me, at the dimensions. And nobody watches the watcher, it said. You've proved that all autumn. You told them the truth about me every way you knew how, and what did they do? It let my mother's kitchen hold the answer. And here's where I have to confess the worst hour of that winter, which was not an hour it gave me, but one I gave myself driving home that night. Because I ran the sum exactly the way it wanted me to. That's what the whole autumn had been for, I think. Every rehearsal, every showing, the wallet squared to the shelf fedged. Not to hide, to acquaint, to bring me along slow into the fact of it until the fact stopped blinding me, and I could look straight at it and reckon the terms. And the terms, when I finally made myself say them out loud in the empty truck, were these. It didn't need my consent. It had never once needed anyone's consent. What it wanted was my cooperation, quiet and orderly handover in some spring dark with no mess left for anyone to find. And in exchange, what it was offering, without ever saying one syllable of it out loud, was my mother's life. Her safety, the neighbors, everyone soft and asleep inside the circle I'd spent all fall standing watch on. Refuse, run, resist, bring guns and shouting, and it had 50 years of practice disappearing people in that country and a shelf where it kept their clothes. Cooperate and everybody I loved got to live -1. And the one they lost, they'd never even know they'd lost because it would still drive out on Sundays and fix her fence and hold my mother at the funeral she'd someday have for the body it had finished using and toast at family dinners in my voice with my paws. One beat. Before the part it meant most. She would be loved by it for the rest of her life. It was offering that as a mercy, and the abomination at the bottom of this whole story, the thing I'll carry longest, is that it had studied us so well, and so long and so close, that the mercy was real. I drove home. I did not sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with a topo map still spread from 3 days before, and somewhere around 4 out in the morning, underneath the fear, I went back to work the only way I know how, with my trade. Because it had told me things at that table without meaning to. Anything you watch long enough will show you how to stop it, and I had 3 months of watching stored up. And that night, I finally added it up as cold as it had added me. It was old, and it was patient, and it was smarter about people than people are. But it had habits, and habits repeat, and anything that repeats can be predicted. It worked alone, always. One family, one body. Decades of one at a time. No help and no witnesses, because a witness was the only thing it had ever had to fear. It was vain about its work, vain enough to rehearse for an audience of one, vain enough to square a wallet to a shelf edge for me, and vanity is a weakness. And a weakness can be worked on a schedule you control. It was body-bound. Whatever it truly was underneath, it worked through flesh. And the flesh obeyed at least some of the rules. It ate now. It warmed itself at stoves now. Its bodies wore out on a real clock. A thing that needs a body to cross into is a thing that has to come to you in person, in the flesh, to collect. And it did not know ground the way I knew ground. It knew the rimrock country around its cave down to the pebble better than any living soul. But I had 15 years and 4,000 square miles, and stitched across every mile of it, humming on poles it had walked under for half a century without one reason to understand them, ran my trade. 7,200 volts phase to ground on the distribution laterals in that country. A live system everywhere, invisible to a mind that had spent 50 years mastering people and never once needed to master this. It wanted its change in the spring dark on its ground. I decided to hold it early on mine. I took nearly 3 weeks to build it, and I lived those weeks inside the strangest performance of my life, because now there were two of us acting. I went to Sunday dinner. I passed the potatoes to the thing that was going to wear me. I let it see a man coming to terms, going quiet, going soft around the edges, sleeping badly, drinking a little. A man whose fight was going out of him, and none of that took much acting, and all of it was load-bearing because a thing that vain, that certain, wanted to see surrender. It wanted to believe the autumn had worked. I let it watch the autumn work. One more thing had to be true before any of it could work, and I turned it over for 2 nights before I trusted it. On the porch, it had known where I'd been that day, and if it could know things at that distance, no trap on earth would hold it. But it had shown me the how with its own long breath across the hood of the truck. The cold dust of that chamber had been on my boots and my clothes, and it knew the smell of its own place. That was the whole reach of it. A nose and eyes, and a patience longer than any man's and nothing more. It was not all-knowing, and everything I built in the nights that followed would smell of nothing but my ordinary work. The ground I chose was a place we call the alkali lateral, and I chose it the way you'd expect me to, coldly. On paper first for 6 reasons I checked and rechecked. It's a single-phase lateral, 8 miles of it, running through a bone-dry alkali flat to one stock well and a decommissioned pump site. And the far 7 miles of it now serve nothing at all. The co-op has had it scheduled for retirement for 3 years. Nobody patrols it but me, because for 3 years the only work order on it has been mine. A standing note to eyeball it whenever I'm out that way. It sits 14 miles from the property. I had no way to know whether it had crossed that flat before in all its years, and I didn't need to know because familiarity would buy it nothing out there. The flat is dead level and open. No cover, no rim, no shadow to work. A place where a thing built for patience and closeness would have to cross a 1/4 mile of nothing to reach a man in the open, under whatever light there was. The old pump site has one structure standing, a pole-mounted transformer bank, and a disconnect at the dead end of the line. And the whole 8 miles feed through one recloser at the head, a device whose entire purpose in this world is to take a fault, open, wait, and try again 3 times before it quits. And which a lineman can set, if he chooses, to a mode we use during live line work. One shot to lockout, we call it, and it exists to protect men. What I set was the opposite of protection. I gave that recloser its full count, and then some. A fault on the alkali lateral would not end at the first trip. The recloser would open, wait, and close back in onto whatever the fault was. Full cycles, one after another, before it ever locked out. I'm not going to walk you through every wire of the rest, partly because you'd need my trade to follow it, and partly because I've decided the world doesn't need the instructions. It's enough to say that at the dead-end pump site, over 4 cold nights of unpaid overtime, with the lateral isolated and grounded and dead while I worked, I turned a retired piece of the system into a place where the ground itself could be made lethal. A conductor rigged to drop onto prepared ground. And the prepared ground was the wet caliche apron I soaked each night from the stock tank in a country where nothing else was wet for 40 fressasermb. Step potential. We call the killer in my trade. The voltage between one footstep and the next when current pours into earth. We bury men who learned about it by accident. I spent 4 nights making sure it would be learned on purpose, and then I fed the appetite. At Sunday dinner, the last Sunday, passing the potatoes, I let it come up natural, tired, half-swallowed, the words of a man too worn down to guard them. The co-op was retiring in an old dead-end lateral out on the alkali, I said. My last patrol of it Thursday night, I said, and I complained gently about the overtime. A man being sent alone at night, 14 miles from anywhere. One last time to walk out a line nobody needed anymore. I did not look up when I said it. I passed the potatoes to my mother and I let one beat of silence sit before the part I meant most. Kind of sad, I said, retiring a thing that still works fine. But I guess everything gets replaced. Across that table in the candle smoke, I felt it go still, and I knew, with the certainty my trade runs on, that it had heard everything inside everything. An offering, a schedule, a broken man arranging his own quiet handover far from his mother's house, and that its vanity was already satisfied with the neatness of it, and that on Thursday night, 14 chismar out on my ground, it would come to collect me. Thursday came down cold and moonless, and I was out on the flat by 10 Hal, parked at the pump site with the work lights off, wearing my Class 2 rubber gloves and my dielectric overshoes under ordinary clothes, with the 30-30 on the seat, which I brought knowing it was a comfort and not a plan. It came at midnight, and it came honest. That's the word I keep landing on. All autumn it had come at us crooked through faces and voices and mercies. Out there with nobody left to fool, it crossed the flat toward my truck in a straight line in the open in Saul's shape with Saul's canvas coat open to the cold, and it walked wrong the whole way. And I finally saw its true gait, the one it had been correcting since September. And I'm going to describe it once and then leave it alone. It walked the way a thing walks that learned legs from watching. Each stride placed, correct and dead. No sway, no settle. Nothing in it that a body does on its own, and it covered ground faster than the strides could explain. And June, back home in the shop where I chained her against her own courage, was 14 miles from us, and I was the only living thing on that flat. And I have never in my life felt the size of the dark the way I felt it watching that shape come on with no hurry in it at all. It stopped 40 facetters out. Headlight distance, porch distance. It knew its distances with me. The soaked apron lay between us, dark and quiet and reading dry as everything else on that flat. And I stood on the far side of it beside the truck on ground I knew to the inch, with the pole line closed in my glove. Come to terms, it said, and the wind took the double voice and thinned it. A sensible man, it said. It said the change was easiest taken kneeling, and that afterward it would drive my truck back in for me and clock my hours, and no one would ever ask one question. And it took a step, and I said the only thing I'd planned to say. I asked it if my grandfather was afraid. At the end, in the cave, in the dark. I asked if he was afraid. It stopped. And whatever it was, however long it had lived, however many shelves of us it had kept, its vanity could not leave a question about its work unanswered. And it tilted my grandfather's head. And it gave me the truth in my own cadence, and the truth was its last mistake, because the truth took 4 seconds to say, and I'd built everything around getting 4 seconds, while it stood inside the ring of caliche I'd been soaking for 4 nights, on ground that looked to any eye but mine, dry as every other yard of that flat. "No," it said. "He thought I was you, not a perfect me." It hadn't needed perfection, and that's the part I'll carry. It had watched this family long before September, long enough to wear a rough version of somebody an old man would go with. And Saul, that spring, had looked at his own daughter and asked who she was. My height, my coat, something close to my voice, calling him up the wash. That would have been enough, and he would have gone happy, because he thought his grandson had come to walk him home. I dropped the line, and I won't give you the mechanism, but the pull was in my gloved hand, and the conductor came down out of the dark and touched the prepared ground between us. There was no thunderclap. People expect the movie. What there was a sound out of the wet ground itself, a frying hum, and light with no fire to it. Blue-white, hard, standing off the caliche in sheets. And inside that light, the thing that had taken my family's autumn stood with both feet planted in a voltage gradient that a cow crossing a downed line does not survive, and 7,200 volts went into it. Through the ground, through the flesh it was wearing, through the step it had just taken. The flesh answered. The shape it had worn since September went down the way electricity puts bodies down, all at once, wrong. Then the recloser, 8 miles away, saw the fault and opened, and the flat went black and silent. And I stood in that silence counting the way I count at work, and on my count it closed back in, and the light stood up off the ground again. And I would give a great deal to tell you the first shot was the end, and it was not the end. Because what rose up out of Saul's collapsing shape into the second light was the occupant. I saw it. I'm the only living person who has. The recloser ran the cycles I had given it. Open. Wait. Close. Again. And each time the light stood back up, I saw it more. And I'm going to give you exactly 3 seconds of it, which is what I can carry. It was tall in a way the coat had been hiding by hunching, and it was thin, built long, narrow through every joint. And it was mid-change when the current found it, and it could not finish. Faces moved on it. That's the sentence I've never said out loud to anyone. Faces moved on it, surfacing and sinking. My grandfather, the heavy-browed man from a license photograph expired in 1971, a woman I have since found in a newspaper from 1958. Strangers, a child, and mine. Mine, half-built, close. The me it had spent a whole autumn learning, rising to the surface of that burning thing and reaching for finished and never getting there. And the sound it made was every voice on that shelf at once, and none of them was screaming, which was the worst of it. They were all in the fire, in the locked blue light, still trying to sound right. I let it run every cycle it had. The recloser reached the end of its count and locked out, and the flat went dark for good, and nothing out there was trying anymore. Then I opened the disconnect and grounded the line and walked the checks. You walk on a dead circuit with hands I could not keep still. And I burned what remained with 60 gallons of diesel I'd staged on Tuesday, in a pit I cut on Wednesday in alkali hardpan, where nothing grows and nothing would ever be plowed up. And I stood at that pit until 4:00 in the morning feeding it. And the fire burned ordinary orange the whole time, which I took and still take to mean that what went into it was finally, entirely dead. The shape it had worn went into that pit with everything else. My grandfather had never once been out on that flat. He was where he had been since September, in the rimrock, where I had left him with a promise. And before the sky finished going gray, I was driving back for him. I took the 2-track as far as it goes, and walked in with the first light, with the tarp I'd bought for him in December and kept behind the seat since. And I wrapped my grandfather, and I carried him out of that country on my shoulders because he had carried me on his through the county fair. And I talked to him most of the walk and most of the drive down to the county road. That part's ours. From the county road at full daylight, I called the sheriff. The rest is the part of the story that happened in daylight, in offices, and I'll give it to you straight. I told them I'd finished a late patrol on the Alkali Lateral, and that instead of going home, I'd driven to the Rimrock because the September search had never sat right with me, and I'd been carrying a tarp behind my seat for a month, which was true, and that I'd checked the caves below the rim and found my grandfather and panicked and carried him out before I called anyone, which I should not have done, and knew I should not have done. Every piece of that was true except the order, and I've made my peace with the order. They questioned me for 2 days, on and off, in a room with coffee and paper cups, and I don't blame one man for 1 hour of it. I'd spent the autumn telling people the man in that house was not my grandfather. I'd found the body. I'd been working alone at night, 14 miles out, the same night the man in that house was last seen. I looked exactly as suspicious as I should have looked, and what saved me is that there was nothing to find, because the truth they were guarding against was not a truth any of them could imagine. Because here is what else happened that morning. While I was carrying my grandfather down out of the Rimrock, my mother drove out to the property, the way she did every morning, and the door was unlocked, and the kettle was cold, and the green chair was empty, and the man she believed was her father was gone. No coat missing but the one he wore, no note, nothing ever seen again. By noon, the county was working 2 cases at once. The body of Solomon, recovered from a cave past the edge of the possible, and the man who had lived under his name from September into January, vanished out of a warm house in the middle of winter. The sheriff's people and the state investigators worked that cave for 9 days, the same count it took to lose him. And what the medical examiner ruled was that Solomon, my grandfather, died of exposure within roughly 48 hours of the 14th of September in that chamber, 4 1/2 miles past the point where a dog sat down and screamed, which left the county a problem it did not want, because the county had a front page and a hospital record, and 40 witnesses to a man who came home on the 23rd and lived among us into January. The file they built to hold that problem says what files say. A transient male, identity unknown, in a state of confusion, mistaken in good faith by a traumatized family, presence in the household attributed to the family's impaired judgment under grief. Whereabouts now unknown, case open, inactive. Nobody honestly believed that 40 people and a hospital and a newspaper had all independently mistaken a stranger for Solomon. The report was not written to be believed. It was written so the case could be closed around a fact no office had language for, and closing was all anyone asked of it. The state put out a short release about historical remains recovered from the Rimrock, and the county paper never retracted the miracle story. It simply stopped mentioning it. There's a detective 3 counties over, a heavy-set man near retirement who worked cold cases his whole career, who sat in my kitchen for 2 hours one evening in the spring and read the file and read the older files. The 1971 man, the 1958 woman, the wanderers who came home changed and got so much better before they passed. And then he looked at me for a long, quiet minute and closed the folder and said that some paperwork exists to close a question, not to answer it. And that this was that kind of paperwork, and he could live with that if I could. Then he thanked me for the coffee and left. He takes my call every year on the 23rd of September. Neither of us has ever once said the word out loud. Because there is a word. A Navajo co-worker of mine, a journeyman I've strung line with for a decade, listened to about half of this story one night at a hotel bar after a mutual aid storm job. Only half, because halfway through he put his hand flat on the bar and asked me, quiet and formal, to stop talking, and told me the half I'd told was already more than he wanted held in his head, and that his grandmother had rules about this that he'd stop believing around the time he stopped believing everything else, and that he was going to start believing them again on the drive home. He told me people out here don't say the name of it, and he didn't say it either, and so neither will I. Whatever the true accounting of that thing is, whose stories hold it, and whose old rules mapped it, it isn't mine to write down. And the men and women whose grandmothers kept those rules were right the whole time, and the rest of us drove our lines and our roads through their country for 100 years, certain in the way that empty men are certain that nothing was watching us learn to be comfortable. We buried my grandfather on the 9th of April on a clear, cold morning next to my grandmother with a headstone that carries the date the medical examiner settled on, the middle of September of that year. And if anyone at the service found the date strange against the front page they all remembered, nobody said so. Grieving people will believe almost anything that offers them hope back. They will believe the other kind of story too, when believing it lets everyone rest. My mother knows what the official file says, and believes it mostly at the level where believing gets done. A confused stranger, an impossible, forgivable mistake. She grieved twice, the second grief worse than the first, made heavier by the shame of the autumn. And there was a stretch of that spring where she couldn't look at me, not from anger, because I'd told her. All autumn, I'd told her. And she'd needed a story about me, and she'd used the one that hurt least. I wanted on the record that I have never once, not in the hardest moment, held that against her, because I explained things away all autumn too. The mind protects the shape of the world it knows. She and I have supper every Sunday now at her place in town, and we talk about Saul, the real one, the left-handed one, the county fair, and the brake fluid, and we are, in the way of people who have been through a thing they can't fully hand each other, closer than we ever were. June lived out her days with me in town, a shop dog retired to a couch, and she slept every night of the rest of her life pressed against my bedroom door, facing out, on duty, and I let her because she'd earned the post, and because I slept better for it. She died old, in her sleep, 2 falls later, and I'll tell you the truth, I dug that grave harder than I've ever dug anything. The wallet I turned over to the investigators, and in time, quietly, the family of the man from 1971, the one still living 3 counties over, got a knock on the door and an answer, 55 years late, and a set of remains recovered from deeper in that rim rock to bury under his own name. I drove over myself months after, once the officials were done, because I decided they were owed one thing the file would never give them. I sat in a kitchen with his daughter, a woman near 80, and I told her that her father had been found by a man who was looking for his own, and that he had been kept all those years in a dry, cold, quiet place, and that he was home now, and that whoever took him could never take anyone again. All of that was true. She asked me almost nothing, which told me her family had done 55 years of their own explaining. And when I stood to leave, she held my hand at the door in both of hers for a long moment, and that was the last piece of it. That finished it. The alkali lateral came down on schedule that summer. I pulled the wire myself, mile by mile, and the co-op sold the poles to a rancher for corral posts. And there is nothing out on that flat now at all, just hardpan and wind, and one shallow dish in the ground that fills with alkali dust a little more every year. And I drive out there once each September, on the 23rd, and I stand at the edge of it in the evening light, and I make sure. 15 years of patrols taught me what that country is supposed to look and sound and feel to be, and every year it is exactly that. Ordinary. Empty. Still. He kept well, it told me once, about the man it took. You'll bury him proper, it said, When we're finished. We're finished. I buried him proper. And the last thing I'll set down here is the thing I say out loud. Alone. To the wind on that flat. Once a year. Every year. Because a promise spoken in a cave in the dark deserves its answer. Spoken in the open light. And because it is the plain truth. And the plain truth is the only tool I've ever fully trusted. I found you. Both of you. And only one of you came home with me. For 23 years, I was a conservation officer for the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources, and for the last 16 of those years, my district was San Juan County, which is the biggest county in the state, and one of the emptiest places in the lower 48. My name is Ray Hollis. I am 61 years old now, retired, and I live in Monticello with my wife and a healer dog that will not go south of Blanding, no matter what I do. Only my wife has heard the whole of this story. The one other man who knew what happened is gone now. So, I am going to tell it to you. Everything in this account happened. The country is real. Comb Ridge is real. Butler Wash is real. The town of Bluff and the San Juan River are real. And you can stand in nearly every spot I am going to describe. Nearly. One canyon I am going to leave unnamed, and the names of the people have been changed. And by the end of this, you will understand both choices. Whether you should go stand in any of it is a different question, and you can decide that for yourself. A game warden's job in the desert is not what people picture. There are no elk meadows down there. My district ran from the Abajo Mountains south to the San Juan River and the Navajo Nation boundary. And most of it was slick rock, blackbrush, juniper, and sand. What I managed mostly was desert bighorn sheep. San Juan County holds some of the best desert bighorn country left anywhere, and a mature ram is worth a great deal of money to the wrong kind of person. So, I spent my winters counting sheep from ridge lines, checking tags, and looking for poachers. I was good at it. I want that on the record because everything I am going to tell you runs contrary to the whole training of a man who spent his life reading sign in dirt. I could tell you the age, sex, and rough weight of a mule deer from a track in damp sand. I could tell you whether a coyote was trotting or hunting. When I say something was wrong with a set of tracks, I am not a tourist saying it. I am a man who read tracks for a living. And I am telling you the sign on that ground could not be true, and it was there anyway. It started on the 11th of February 2017, 9 years ago now, with a dead ram on Comb Ridge. If you have never seen Comb Ridge, picture a wave of sandstone 80 miles long running north to south from the Abajos down into Arizona, tilted up on its western edge, so the whole formation leans east. The west face is a wall. The east side slopes down into Butler Wash, which is a broad, sandy drainage full of juniper and old ancestral Puebloan ruins tucked into the alcoves. Highway 163 cuts through the ridge west of Bluff, and Highway 95 cuts through it farther north. Between those two cuts, there is almost nothing. No houses, no power. A dirt road runs up the Butler Wash side, and that is all. On the morning of the 11th, a rancher checking cows up the Butler Wash Road called our price office and said he had glassed a dead bighorn partway up the east slope of the comb, well north of the highway, and it looked fresh, and it looked strange. The word he used was strange. Dispatch passed it to me because everything south of the Abajos got passed to me. I drove down from Monticello, through Blanding, took Highway 163 west out of Bluff, and turned north up the Butler Wash Road. It was cold and clear. There had been snow 4 days earlier, and it still lay in the shadows of the junipers on the north sides, which mattered later because snow holds sign better than sand. I found the ram about 13 Mr. Sup, 400 YED off the road, on an open bench of slick rock below the crest of the comb. It was a mature ram, maybe 8 years old, 3.4 curl, the kind of animal a trophy poacher would take a serious risk for. Nobody had taken anything. The head was there, the cape was there, the back straps, which any meat poacher strips first, were there. The ram was whole, lying on its side on open rock, and it had been dead less than a day. The bighorn hunt had closed months before. Not that a season means anything to a lion. I remember standing over that animal thinking the words out of season, and I did not know yet how far out of season this case was going to run. Here is what was wrong with it, in the order I noticed. First, the ground. Every lion kill I ever worked showed some mix of punctures, feeding, dragging, and caching. A lion pulls its kill to cover, opens the gut, caches what it does not finish. This ram lay in the open, uncached, unopened, untouched, and the rock under it was clean. Second, the ram's neck was broken, not bitten, broken. I put my hands on it, and under the unmarked hide the upper neck moved where no neck moves. I could not have named the vertebra without opening it, but the break was high, and it was complete. No punctures, no claw drag. Nothing had bitten this animal. Something had taken its head and turned it past the point the neck allows, and a desert bighorn ram carries a neck that can absorb a full-speed horn strike from another 200 lb ram. I do not know a lot of things, but I know what it takes to do that with bare force, and I did not like the answer even standing there in daylight. Third, and this is the part I did not put in my written report, the ram's eyes were gone, not pecked out. Ravens go for the eyes first on any carcass, and raven work is messy and obvious. These sockets were empty and clean, and there was not one raven track on that bench. And there were no ravens in the sky, and if you know the desert, you know that a fresh carcass without ravens over it is its own kind of alarm. I worked outward from the carcass the way I was trained, in a spiral, reading ground. On the third pass, I cut the sign. It came up the slope from the wash, out of the sand and into the snow patches under the junipers. And in the sand, it was a canine track. A big one. I measured 4 1/2 inches, which is bigger than any coyote and at the top end for a wolf. And there were no wolves in San Juan County. The stride said the animal was moving easy, unhurried, straight toward the bench where the ram died. 40 yards below the bench, in a patch of shaded snow about 10 ft long, the track changed. I want to describe this exactly because everything that came after turns on it. The snow patch held 5 prints. The first 2 were canine. The third print was wrong in a way my eyes refused for a second or two. Elongated, the toe pad stretched, the whole print pulled long. The fourth print was a bare human foot mid-stride. The fifth print was a bare human foot mid-stride, not stopped, not standing. The gait never broke. The stride length never changed. Whatever crossed that snow went from 4 ft to 2 ft in the space of 3 steps without pausing in February, barefoot in snow, walking uphill toward a 200 lb ram it was about to kill with its hands. I stood over that snow patch for a long time. I measured. The human print was 11 in. The toes were long, and the impression of the toes was deep, deeper than the heel, meaning weight forward, meaning it was climbing on the balls of its feet, comfortable, at home. The bare prints continued to the bench. There were prints around the ram, and then the sign simply ended, not faded onto slick rock, ended in sand with a final left footprint pressed clean and nothing after it in any direction, and the nearest rock 40 ft away. I have heard every explanation. A second snowfall filling old tracks, overlapping animals, a barefoot hiker in February, more than a dozen miles from pavement. I ran every one of them in my head that afternoon standing on the bench, and none of them survived contact with what was actually on the ground. I was not a frightened man at that point. I was an offended one. Sign is supposed to add up. This didn't add up, and it felt personal. I hiked out. And here is the last detail from that first day. Walking back down to the truck in the wash bottom in soft sand I had crossed 2 hours earlier, my own boot prints from the walk-in were there, plain and clean. Something had walked in them. Print for print. A bare human foot inside each of my boot tracks headed the direction I was now headed. Lay down sometime in the 2 hours I had spent up on that bench. I did not run. I made myself not run. But I will tell you that the last quarter mile to that truck was the longest quarter mile of my career to that point. And I say to that point because the desert was not finished with me. I wrote the ram up as a probable lion kill with scavenger interference, which was false, and I knew it was false when I typed it. And I typed it anyway because there is no box on a division form for what I found. Then I did what any warden does with a problem carcass. I went back to check it. That was the 14th of February, 3 days later. I planned to be off the comb by dark. I was not because on the way in I found a second kill, and the second kill cost me the afternoon. This one was a mule deer doe down in Butler Wash proper, maybe a mile south of the ram site, and it was the same signature. Neck broken high and clean through unmarked hide. No blood on the ground, no caching, no feeding, no scavengers. Eyes gone, killed and left. I want you to sit with that phrase because it is the phrase that reorganized my thinking out there. Predators kill to eat. Poachers kill to take. This was neither. This was something killing because killing was the point. Or because the animals themselves were the message, and the message was addressed to whoever came to read the sign. And I was the only person in 1,000 square miles whose job was reading sign. By the time I finished working the doe, it was dusk. Dusk in Butler Wash in February comes down fast and cold. The comb blocks the western light, so the wash goes to shadow while the sky is still bright, and the temperature falls 20 degrees in an hour, and every juniper turns into a dark shape you have to decide about. I got to the truck at full dark and started south down the Butler Wash Road with 12 miles of sand and rock between me and the highway. One lane, junipers close on both sides and stretches. I was doing maybe 25, which is what the road allows. 4 miles down, my headlights picked up eye shine in the brush off the right shoulder. Green-white, high off the ground, chest high on a man. I took it for a deer standing in the junipers and kept on. The eye shine kept pace with the truck, not for a few seconds, for 2 miles. Off the right shoulder, 30 to 40 ft out in the brush, chest high, level, smooth through terrain that was rock, deadfall, wash cuts, and juniper thick enough that a man could not run through it in daylight at any speed at all. I sped up to 35, which on that road is reckless. It held. The lights would lose it behind a tree, and it would be there again on the far side, level and smooth. And the thing I could not stop noticing was that it did not bob. Everything that runs on legs rises and falls. Deer-bound, coyotes trot with a rhythm. Men jolt. That eye shine moved down the length of Butler Wash beside my truck perfectly level without one rise or fall for 2 miles of broken ground. And nothing alive that I have ever seen can do that. Then it crossed in front of me. I never saw a body. I want to be honest about the limits of what I saw. What I saw was the eye shine leave the right side, and a long, low shape cross the road at the edge of my headlights maybe 80 yards ahead. And the shape crossed a road that is 15 ft wide, in what I judged to be 2 strides. The shape was wrong for the strides. It was low when it should have been tall and long when it should have been narrow. And by the time my light swung to where it entered the brush on the left, there was nothing. And I drove the remaining 6 miles to the highway at a speed I will not put a number on. And I did not look at the left side brush. And I could not tell you why except that some certainty below thought had decided that not looking was what would keep me alive. At the junction with Highway 163, there is a cattle guard. When my tires hit that cattle guard, something behind me, back up the dark wash I had just come out of, screamed. I have heard everything the desert says. Lions in February, which is a sound that turns tourists white. Elk. Foxes, which scream. Two ravens fighting. I have heard a man scream once. A heart attack call at Sand Island. This was none of them. And it was all of them. And that is the closest I can get. It was a scream built out of parts of other screams, assembled by something that had heard pain without ever feeling it. And the sound carried a mile of open desert and hit the truck glass, and I felt it in my teeth. I drove home to Monticello and sat in the driveway for a while before I went in. And my wife asked what was wrong, and I told her a poaching case was bothering me. That was the first lie I told her about it. It was not the last, and I am not proud of any of them. But I will stand by everyone, because I know now what listens, and I did not want it hearing her name in my mouth. You will understand that sentence by the end. There was a man named Harrison Yazzie who ran sheep on the Navajo Nation south of the San Juan, across the river from Bluff, out toward the Valley of the Gods country on the north side, and Chinle Wash on the south. He was in his 70s then. I had known him 15 years, first through a livestock depredation case, then through the slow way men who work the same country come to know each other. He was the best hand with sign I ever met, better than me, and he did not waste words. And when he did spend them, you could bank them. I found him at the Twin Rocks Cafe in Bluff on the morning of the 18th, and I sat down across from him and told him all of it. The ram, the doe, the tracks that changed in the snow, my boot prints walked in, the road, and the eye shine and the scream. Harrison did not say anything for a long time. He looked out the window at the red bluffs behind the town. Then he did something I had never seen him do in 15 years. He reached over and turned my coffee cup a quarter turn, so the handle faced away from me, and he said quietly, "Don't say what you think it is. Not indoors, not anywhere." I said I didn't know what it was. He said, "You do. Everybody who works out here 15 years knows the word. Don't use it. Talking about them is a door, and a door opens from both sides. I'm not going to pretend to teach anybody's tradition here. It is not mine to teach." And Harrison would be the first to say that most of what gets told about this subject on the internet is garbage told by people who never lost a night's sleep to it. I will only tell you what he told me because it turned out to be operational, and it turned out to be true. He told me these things are not animals, and they are not spirits. They are people. That is the worst part, and the whole part. A person who traded everything a person is for the ability to put on something else. He said the old ones could wear a coyote or a wolf the way I wore a coat. He said they take the eyes because the eyes are how they learn a shape from the inside. He said they kill without eating because hunger is one of the last human things, and they practice being past it. And then he told me about Gerald Sipe. Sipe was a name I knew from the case files, a pot hunter, an artifact looter out of Farmington, New Mexico, who had worked the ruins of Butler Wash and Comb Wash for years, digging ancestral Puebloan sites, selling pots, and worse than pots on the private market. Federal agents raided half the county for looting in 2009. You can look that up, it made national news. Sipe was never charged because in the spring of 2009, Gerald Sipe walked into Butler Wash to dig a site he had been bragging about, an alcove with a sealed room in it, and he never walked out. His truck sat at the mouth of the wash for 9 days before anyone reported it. Search and rescue worked the drainage for 2 weeks. They found his shovel, his screen, his headlamp still switched on with the battery dead, arranged in a row on a flat rock, arranged. They never found Sipe. Harrison said, "The room that man opened had been closed on purpose, closed with things inside it that were put there to stay. The people who sealed it knew their business." He turned his own cup a quarter turn. Nothing came out of that hole wearing Sipes boots. But something has been out there since learning. It killed dogs the first few years. Then coyotes were seen doing things coyotes do not do. Then it was quiet a long while, and quiet is worse. Now it is killing rams with its hands and walking in a warden's boot prints. Do you see what it is doing? I said. Practicing. It is learning to be a person, Harrison said. From the outside in. Animals first. Now it wants the last shape. It is studying the man who studies tracks. He looked at me for a long moment, and there was nothing in his face I would call fear, which frightened me more than fear would have. It picked you because you came when the ram died. You answered. Out here, answering is how it knows a thing is alive. I asked him what I should do. He said, stop going down there. I told him I couldn't. It was my district. There were spring lambing surveys. There were people camping the wash all season. Families. Kids at the ruins. Harrison nodded and paid for both our coffees, which he had never once done. And standing at the register, he said the sentence I have carried ever since. He said, then it is going to come and look at you up close, Ray. When it does, no matter what shape it is wearing, and no matter whose voice it is using, do not answer it. Not one word. It cannot take what you do not hand it, and your voice is the handle on everything you are. For 3 weeks, nothing. I ran my district. I stayed out of Butler Wash and told myself it was casework prioritization. The kills stopped, or stopped being found. I began building the story a man builds, the one where it was a sick lion and a strange week, and Harrison was an old man being careful with old things. Then, on the 9th of March, at 2 in this morning, my dog started growling at the front window of my house in Monticello, which is 60 highway miles from Butler Wash, and did not stop for 4 hours. That healer had never growled at the window in his life. He is the dog I still have, the one that will not go south of Blanding. And that night, he stood with his hackles in a full ridge staring at a dark yard, growling in a register I had never heard from him, low and continuous. I went out with a flashlight and my service pistol, which was a .40 caliber Glock, and I walked the whole yard. Nothing. No tracks in the frost on the grass. In the damp crusher fines along the edge of the driveway where the gravel gives way to packed dust. My own boot prints came up from the road to the front window and stopped. I had not walked up from the road. My truck was in the driveway. I checked the tread pattern against my own boots on my own feet. And it was my tread. And I stood in my driveway at 2 in the morning holding my own boot up to a flashlight. And inside the house, my dog kept growling at something over my shoulder that I have thanked God every day since I did not turn around fast enough to see. 3 nights later it used the first voice. I was ahead of it by one accident of habit. I sleep with the window cracked, winter and summer. Always have. At around 3 in the morning, I came awake to my father's voice in the backyard saying my name. My father was 8 years dead by then. I want to be plain about what I heard because precision matters more here than anywhere. It was not a resemblance. It was his voice. The pitch, the Cache Valley vowels, the little hitch he had before my name because he smoked 40 years. It said, Ray, come out back, Ray. I need a hand with the gate. My father said exactly that sentence to me 1,000 times growing up. We had irrigation gates. It was the most ordinary sentence of my childhood, and it was coming out of the dark of my backyard in Monticello in March, and every part of my body from the neck down was already moving to obey before the front of my mind caught up. And I gripped the bed rail and stayed. Do not answer it. Not one word. I lay there. It called 4 more times over about an hour, patient, unhurried. The gaps between calls time the way a real man times them, and that patience was the tell. A fake escalates, but this adjusted, this waited, And I have waited out poachers for hours in the dark, and I understood that it and I now shared a trade. The last call was different. The last time it said, "Ray, come out back." And then, after a silence, in my father's voice, flat, with nothing in it, "I found your eyes." Then my dog exploded at the back door and the yard was empty. And in the morning, in the frost, there were no tracks. But the back gate, a gate I chained because of the dog, stood open, with the chain not cut and not unhooked, but straightened. A 3/8-inch steel chain link pulled straight. I drove to Bluff that day and told Harrison. He listened and asked one question. "Did you answer?" "No." "Then you are still ahead," he said. "What called you was an outside. It cannot remember your father, Ray. You remember your father. It reads the man it is hunting and hands him back what he carries. The voice, the vowels, the one sentence he most wants to hear across a dark yard. But an outside is all it can pull from you without your help. It does not have you yet." He was quiet. "Then it will try the radio next. Radios confuse the rule. A voice coming out of a box in your own truck already feels indoors with you. Be careful what you answer on the radio." I thought that was the strangest sentence he had said yet. 8 days later, it was the one that saved my life. On the 20th of March, dispatch relayed a report of shots fired at night near Sand Island, which is the BLM campground and boat launch on the San Juan River just west of Bluff, under a cliff covered in petroglyphs, that people drive across 3 states to see. Shots at night near a campground gets a warden out of bed, poacher or not. I got there at 6:40 in the morning, first light. The campground was nearly empty, early season. 3 rigs, all quiet. I was stepping out of the truck when my radio keyed up and our dispatcher's voice said, "Ray, confirm you're out there alone." My thumb was on the microphone before 2 things caught up with me. She never used my first name on the air, not once in a decade, and Harrison's warning came back whole. "Be careful what you answer on the radio." I set the microphone down in the seat and I called the office on my cell phone instead. And the dispatcher who picked up told me she had not transmitted anything to anybody in over an hour. I stood beside that truck a while before I could make my legs work, because the voice on my radio had been hers to the smallest turn of it, and I understood that the rest of this scene had been arranged for me, and I walked into it anyway, because that is the job. No casings on the road, no blood, no drag marks, no gut pile. What I found instead, on the boat ramp itself, laid in a row on the concrete the way a careful man lays out tools, were 3 dead ravens with their eyes gone, and the fresh prints of bare human feet, 11 inches toes, long, coming up out of the river. Out of the river. The San Juan in March runs maybe 44 degrees. The prints came up the ramp soaking wet, walked to where the ravens lay, and returned to the water. And there were no prints anywhere else. And I stood on that ramp and understood that there had been no shots fired. It had learned what call brings me. It had reported me to myself. That was the morning I stopped thinking of it as a haunting and started thinking of it as an adversary, which is a thing I knew how to have. And it was the morning it made its first mistake. Because it had just shown me its method. It had proved that the right call, offered the right way, would move me to a piece of ground it chose. And in proving that, it taught me the reverse. A thing that hunts by calling can be called. I stood on that ramp, cold to the bone. And instead of breaking, I got what my wife calls my case face. It had studied me. Fair enough. I had spent 22 years studying things that did not want to be studied. Here is what I knew, laid out the way I would build any case. It ranged from Coombe Ridge to my own front yard in Monticello, 60 miles of open country. And it crossed that country at night without roads, and without once being seen doing it. It was strong past any animal I could name. The neck breaks, the chain. It mimicked at a level that beat a son's ear for his own father and a warden's ear for his own dispatcher. It took eyes, always eyes, from everything. It did not eat. It was patient, and it was escalating on a schedule. And every escalation ended with it closer to me. And it obeyed at least one rule, because Harrison's rule had held twice. It worked to make me answer. It did not simply come through the wall. A thing that can straighten chain does not need my voice to kill my body. So, the voice was for something else. Whatever it wanted was not my meat. Harrison said it out loud that afternoon at his sheep camp south of the river with Chinley Wash running low and red behind him. It has the animals down, he said. Eyes let it take an animal whole from the inside. People are different. What you have seen of people, the faces, the voices, even the truck a wife expects to find parked next to her husband. Those are surfaces. It pulls them off the person looking at it out of memory and expectation and wears them back at him. That is why your father was exact. But a surface is all it can take that way. A person is not a surface. A person is a voice, answering, a name, habits, a dog, a wife, a district. It cannot pull that off a witness. It needs you to open the door and hand yourself across. That is why the rule is the rule. He fed the fire a piece of greasewood. It is going to stop asking soon, Ray. When it cannot get the last thing by asking, it will build the best outside it has and go looking for an answer with it. It will wear the closest thing it has. Which is what? Harrison looked at the fire and said, Sipe. The first report came on the 28th of March from a river outfitter driving Highway 163 at midnight east of the Comb Ridge Cut. A man walking the center line away from town. No vehicle in either direction for 20 miles. The outfitter slowed to offer a ride. The man did not turn around. The outfitter said the man's arms were wrong, too long, held too still, and that he was barefoot, and that when the headlights reached him, the man stopped walking and stood, and the outfitter, a former Marine, hit the gas and did not lift until Bluff. The second report came from a San Juan County Sheriff's deputy named Alvit Sosi, who I knew and trusted. 2nd of April, 2 hours in the morning, same highway, the long straight west of the Comb, where the road runs at the base of the ridge. She saw a man standing off the shoulder at the fence line facing the road. She lit him up with the spotlight. Alva had worked that county 9 years. She had cut dead men out of rolled trucks and walked up on armed drunks alone. She told me in my office with the door shut that she put the spotlight on that man and her body put the car in drive and left before her mind had finished deciding anything. She said the man was Anglo, 60-ish, heavy through the shoulders, in a canvas coat rotted to lace. And she said his face was right. All the parts were right, and it was not a face. She said it was a copy of a face, correct in every measurement and holding nothing behind it. And she said the whole time the light was on him, he was smiling. And the smile did not once move, not a twitch, not a breath, for the 6 or 8 seconds she looked. And that a human face cannot hold anything perfectly still, and that is how you know one. I pulled Gerald Sipe's old booking photo from the 2003 misdemeanor file that morning and drove it to her house. She looked at it for 1 second and went into her kitchen, and I heard her being sick, and that was my confirmation. And I want it noted that Alva Sosi kept working nights in that county for years after, which is the kind of courage that does not get medals. Then on the 4th of April, it stopped rehearsing on strangers. My wife, Carol, taught 3rd grade in Monticello. On the 4th, she came home from a school workshop down in Bluff later than planned, after dark, north on Highway 191, and she told me, casually, over dinner, not knowing a thing, because I had kept it all from her, that the strangest thing had happened at the Shirt Tail corner south of Blanding. She had seen me standing at the highway's shoulder next to my parked patrol truck, and she had braked and pulled over onto the gravel 100 feet past, because obviously it was me, my truck, my green uniform jacket, my build. And she was reaching for the door handle when she looked in the mirror, and the truck was gone. Not driving away. Gone. And the man in her mirror was still there where the truck was not. And he was already walking toward her car, closing the 100 feet. And she said, and my wife is the level one of the two of us. She said his walk was what made her leave rubber on that shoulder. She said the walk was rehearsed, every piece of it correct, and no walk in it. She laughed, telling me, said she must be more worn out than she thought. Seeing things. And did I want more potatoes? I did not laugh, because I understood what I was being shown. It had run out of patience with the outside of Gerald's sipe, and it had pulled a better outside off the one witness who carried me everywhere she went. My truck, my jacket, my build, all of it lifted out of my own wife's expectation of me, good enough to stop her on a dark highway. And I understood what it had been reaching for. If she had rolled that window down and said my name to it, it would have had her answer, and her answer would have opened her. And it would have taken enough of Carol to use Carol from the inside. And the next time something called to me across a dark yard, it would have called in my wife's voice, knowing the things only my wife knows. And I would have gone to it. I believe that, with everything in me. That night, I sat in my dark kitchen with the Glock on the table, and I made the decision. Not a brave decision, a warden's decision. You do not let a stock-killing animal pattern your ranches and pick its moment. When something starts scouting the house, you stop defending and you go hunt it on ground you choose before it chooses. I called Harrison at 6:00 the next morning. I said, "It warned me. It stopped my wife on 191. The line was silent a moment. Then Harrison said, "Come to the camp. Bring the rifle you trust and every round you plan to fire. There is a thing my grandfather did that I watched twice. I will do my half. You will have to do yours, and yours is the ugly half, because yours is not to run." Harrison would want this section kept short, and I will keep it short. I will tell you what he did because it belongs to the story and because he is gone, and told me I could someday when telling it might keep somebody's wife from rolling down a window. I will not tell you the words he used because they are not mine. I could not spell them. And this is not an instruction manual. And I do not know whether what Harrison did belonged to any tradition beyond his own family. And I will not claim that it did. I can only tell you what I watched with my own eyes and that it worked. If you take one thing from this part, take the tone of it. An old man doing serious work slowly, correctly, without one wasted motion at a sheep camp under the biggest sky in America. On the rim country south of his camp, there stood a juniper that lightning killed. Struck years back, burned standing, black to the roots. Harrison said wood that the sky itself has judged carries the judgment in its ash. He cut from that tree, and he burned what he cut in a small fire he built, intended a particular way through most of the day. And he sang over it quiet hours while I sat where he told me to sit, which was outside the light, facing away, watching the desert, watching for it. Because it knew, he said. It would know the minute the fire took that this was aimed at it. And things that are aimed at get restless. Nothing came. But at dusk, every dog in that camp, and sheep camp dogs fear nothing on four legs, moved together to the far side of the fire and lay down facing south toward Chinley Wash and stayed there all night. And not one of them made a sound. And Harrison said that when working dogs all go quiet at once, that silence outranks every warning the desert has. In the morning, he ground the char to a fine gray-black ash on a flat stone. I unboxed my rifle rounds. I shot a bolt-action 3008, 20 rounds of 180 grain. And one at a time, Harrison rolled each bullet's exposed nose in the ash, working it into the grooves of the tip with his thumb, and said over each one the same short phrase, 20 times, and set each finished round facing east on the stone. It took 2 hours. He never hurried once. When it was done, he told me the rest. And this is the part I have turned over every night for 9 years. The ash does not kill it, Harrison said. The bullet kills it if your hand is still. The ash takes away its options. Skin is a door, and it goes shape to shape by going through the door. The ash burns off whatever it has borrowed and nails every other door shut. When the marked round is in it, the surfaces fall away, and it is trapped in the one true body underneath. And that body can die. He handed me the last round. Now the hard part. So listen. It will know its danger the moment the first one hits. And it is a person, Ray. Never forget it is a person. That is the whole horror of it. A person trapped in his one true dying body will spend that body's last strength on the man who trapped him. And before you fire, it will not stand out there as a monster because monsters get shot easy. It will come as the thing your finger does not want to shoot. It has been studying which surface that is for 2 months. You already know which one it will pick. I did know. I had known since the 4th of April. Where? I asked him. Where it started, Harrison said. Where it came out of the ground. It sleeps close to its hole. The ones my grandfather knew of always did. The hole is the one true thing it has. The alcove Sipe opened is a mile up a side canyon off Butler Wash. I will take you to the mouth of the canyon. I will not go up it, and you should not either. You do not go into its ground, you call it out onto yours. He looked at me and Ray. It has been trying to make you answer for 2 months. Tomorrow night you finally answer it. You say its name, the man's name, Sipe. That name is bait. It cannot leave alone because that name is the last true thing it owns. You say the name, and then you do not say one word more, no matter what it says back, no matter whose voice it says it in. You went quiet 2 months to buy this one word. Spend it right. We went in on the 7th of April, and I will give you the ground truthfully because the ground mattered. We took the Butler Wash Road north from Highway 163 in the last light. My truck, Harrison beside me with a jar of the remaining ash in his lap. 6 miles up he had me stop where a side canyon comes into the wash from the combe side. I am not going to name which one, and if you know that country well enough to guess, then you know it well enough to know better. There was a flat opening there, maybe 80 yards across. The canyon mouth on the west, the road on the east, scattered junipers, and one dead cottonwood in the middle of the flat. Alone. Bark long gone. Pale gray in the dusk. Harrison walked the flat for half an hour while the light died, laying small amounts of ash in 4 places he chose after long consideration, saying his words at each. Then he gripped my shoulder once, hard, an old man's grip with 50 years of fence wire in it, and he said one word, then nothing. I will be at the truck. Whatever you hear from the truck is not me. And he walked to the road, and I walked to the dead cottonwood, and I put my back against it, facing the canyon mouth, with the 308 loaded, one in the pipe, and a half moon coming up behind the comb, and I waited for full dark. And when it was full dark, I did the thing that went against 2 months of survival in every cell I own. I said Sipe. One word at a conversational volume into 80 yards of silence. For the space of one breath, nothing. Then, every night, noise for a mile quit at once. No mice in the brush, no nighthawks, nothing. A silence so total I could hear the blood beat in my own ears, and up the canyon in the black under the west wall. Something that had been still for a long time stood up. The first thing it sent was my father. Ray, said my father's voice from the canyon mouth. Warm, easy, hitching before my name. Ray, thank God. I've been lost up here. Come give me a hand, son. Nothing. I gave it nothing. My eyes stayed on the dark, and my fingers stayed indexed along the guard, and I gave it silence, and I felt its attention sharpen at the silence, and the voice changed. Hollis. Alva's so easy now. Flat cop calm, perfect. Hollis, it's Sosie. I've got a man down up this canyon. I need you now. A pause. Timed right. Officer needs assistance. That one pulled at 22 years of training, and the pull went deeper than thought, and I stood against it, and I gave it nothing. Then it stepped out where the moonlight reached, and I stopped breathing for a while because it had listened to Harrison somehow, or guessed the same truth Harrison knew. And it came as the shape my finger did not want to shoot. It came as Carol. My wife walked out of that canyon mouth in the blue dress she wore to her sister's wedding. A dress that hung in a closet in Monticello, a dress this thing had never once seen, a dress it pulled out of my own memory and wore at me. Bare feet in the cold sand, and her face was right, and her hair was right. And she stopped 60 yards out in the open moonlight and held out both hands to me and said, in Carol's voice, with Carol's little tired laugh in it, "Ray, honey, what on earth are we doing out here? Take me home." I want to tell you it was easy because I knew Carol was in Monticello behind a locked door with the dog. It was not easy. It was the hardest work of my life. Harder than the shooting that came after because 60% of me believed my eyes over my knowledge. That is what eyes are for. And my arms fought me every inch bringing the rifle up onto my own wife's chest. And the only thing that let me do it was the feet. Carol walks heel first, a little pigeon-toed. 40 years I have watched it. This walked on the balls of its feet, weight forward, toes long, comfortable, at home. The walk from my driveway, the walk from the snow. It saw the rifle come level, and it made its mistake. The same mistake every predator makes at the end. The mistake of certainty. It smiled Carol's smile and held the smile perfectly, absolutely, inhumanly still. And it took one more step, and I put the first ash-marked round through its chest at 55 yards. The sound it made unmade the shape. I cannot write the sound. I have tried for 9 years. The nearest I can put it. Every voice it had ever stolen at once. My father and Alva and Carol and voices I never knew. All screaming out of one throat that was done being a throat. The Carol shape did not fall. It dropped away off of it. Gone. The way Harrison said the surfaces would go. And what stood underneath in the moonlight was small, gray, dried, man-shaped, wrong at every joint, down on all fours and then not. And it came at me faster than anything that size has any business moving, and it did not run away. Harrison had told me true. It spent its last strength coming. 50 yards on a quartering run in bad light. I shot at the second time at 30 and heard the round strike, and it did not slow. I shot at the third time at 15, and the third round broke something structural in it, and it went down sliding and came up one more time inside 10 feet, close enough that I could see in the moon that its eyes were not eyes but collections, close enough to smell it. And the smell was dust and old cold air, cellar air. The air of a room sealed on purpose by people who knew their business. And I put the fourth round through its skull from 6 feet, and Gerald Sipe, or the thing that had worn his name for 8 years, fell at the base of the dead cottonwood and did not get up. The desert noise came back all at once, crickets and wind, every ordinary sound returning in the same second. And I stood at the base of that cottonwood and shook for a while, and I am not ashamed of it. Harrison came from the truck with a lantern. We stood over it a long time. I am not going to describe in full what lay there out of a respect I cannot fully explain, but I will tell you the one thing that matters. Under the lantern, it was the same small gray body the first shot had uncovered. Man-shaped and old and dried. A body that had not truly been alive in the way you and I are alive for a very long time. And on its feet, cracked and rotted and 8 years gone, were a dead man's boots. Every bare print it ever left in snow and sand belonged to the surfaces it wore. The body underneath. The true one. The one thing it could not take off. That body had never taken off Gerald Seitz's boots. Harrison looked at them for a long time and said the last thing he ever said to me about any of it. He said, "That was the piece of the man that was left in there keeping those." Somewhere in that, all these years, was a person who remembered owning boots. He took off his hat. That is why you never say the word, Ray. Not because of what they are, because of what they were. We burned it before dawn where it lay with the rest of the ash and with wood Harrison chose. And he worked over that fire until the sun was full up. And we buried what the fire left in a place he picked, deep under rock. And he did his work over that too. And then we drove out of Butler Wash into the morning and stopped at the cattle guard at Highway 163. And no scream came down the wash behind us, and no scream ever has again. The official record of that spring, if you pulled the files, shows this. 1 bighorn ram and 1 mule deer lost a probable lion predation on Comb Ridge in February. A shots fired report at Sand Island, unfounded. 2 motorist reports of a pedestrian on Highway 163, subject not located. The Gerald Seidt missing persons case still open, presumed dead, 2009. And a discharge of firearm report I filed myself for the night of the 7th of April, in which Warden Ray Hollis dispatched a large predator displaying abnormal aggression in Butler Wash. 4 rounds expended. Carcass destroyed on site over suspected disease exposure. Every line of that report is defensible. Not one line of it tells anybody what happened. That is the thing about the desert. You can put it all down on paper out there, and no one will ever read what it says. The kills stopped. That is the fact I hold on to. From the 8th of April, 9 years ago, to this morning, there has not been one animal found in Butler Wash or on Comb Ridge with a broken neck, clean hide, and empty eyes. Wildlife biologists work that drainage every season now. Families walk to the ruins with their kids. The desert down there went back to being only as dangerous as the desert, which is plenty, and is enough. Harrison Yazzie died 4 winters ago at his camp, in his sleep, in his 80s, with his dogs around him, which is the whole of what he would have asked for. I drove down for the burial. Afterward, one of his grandsons, a young man who is with the tribal police now, walked me to my truck and shook my hand and said his grandfather had him to tell me one thing when the time came. The message was, "The door is shut. Stop checking it." So I have stopped checking it. I retired the next year. Carol knows the whole of it now. I told her everything on the night I retired, at our own kitchen table, with the doors locked and the dog at my feet. And she listened all the way through. And she took my hand, and my wife, the level one of the two of us, said the truest sentence anyone has said about any of this. She said, "You answered a dead ram on a ridge, and it nearly cost us everything, but somebody had to answer." She is right. That is the job. Something kills stock in your district, you go. Something scouts the houses, you hunt it. It does not matter what it is. It matters that it picked your ground and that you did not give it one word more than the one you chose, and that when it came at you, wearing the thing you love best in this world, your hand was still. I am 61 years old, live in Monticello. On clear days from the hill south of town, you can see all the way down that country, the Bajos falling away to Cedar Mesa, and the long dark line of Comb Ridge running south into the haze toward the river. It is the most beautiful country God ever made, and I mean that without reservation, and I will never work it again, and both of those things are true at once. And if you ever drive the Butler Wash Road at night, and people do, all season, and nothing will happen to you, because the door is shut, you may notice about 6 miles up, off the west side, an old dead cottonwood standing alone on a flat at the mouth of a side canyon with a blackened crescent low on its trunk where a fire once reached it. Leave it be. Keep driving. And whatever you think you hear calling your name from up that canyon, it is the wind now. It is only the wind now. I made sure of it.